So good morning, everyone. If you remember me, my name is Greg, coming to you from the Las Vegas VA. I spoke to many of you on performance-based interviewing and also giving you resume tips about a week ago. So our local point of contact, Deidre Devereaux, she gave me some of the follow-up questions you guys had in the chat. And then actually some of you submitted 2 interview questions that if you hang on to the end of this video, I'll try my best to answer those interview questions as if I was the person being interviewed. So I want to go through those questions and then answer and give you some of my thoughts and some of my opinions. So the first one was asked was, when applying for a job in USA Jobs website, the resume is selected by using keywords. Should people alter their resume with some of those words in the announcement? And my answer to that is yes. When I look at a job announcement, when you're tailoring a resume, what you really want to look is you read the job announcement, look at the duty section. That will tell you what they're looking for, and that's the content that should be on your resume, 100%. Another tip, it's kind of a trick that I use with people, is if you go to the section where it says how to apply, there's usually always a link to the occupational questionnaire. Now, most people only think of that questionnaire as something that I answer when I'm actually applying for that job. But if you read through that questionnaire earlier, you might find a few key things that they're looking for that is not listed in the duty section. So if you do find 1 or 2 or 3 things that they're looking for in terms of skills or knowledge base that's not already listed in the duty section, you might want to add it to your resume. Okay, I call those key skills and specific type of knowledge base that they're looking for. So definitely do that. Remember, a resume is about writing about the experience you have based on what they want. So remember, if you're writing them a resume and you're talking about and you're documenting the things that you want to talk about, you're not tailoring it, right? You're doing what you want, not what they want. So I hope that answers that question. The second thing that came up is I've gotten a lot of interviews and even second level interviews. I'm having a hard time getting over the hump to get an offer. Any advice? So I do have a little bit of advice. If you are doing really well, you're getting first interviews, second interviews, your resume is working. You're just not making the final selection. My instinct in most of those cases, and I've been doing this for over 10 years, is the job may be a good job, but it's not a great job for you. It's not working out. But if you do want to learn from that experience, because that's the most important thing, is what I would do is I use the expression, wait for the dust to settle for that job. Let that hiring manager hire that person that they've decided on. Especially if you know them personally, let that new person start that job, right? Matter of fact, I have an entire video on losing gracefully. And from there, then try to reach out to that manager and ask for some feedback on what you could have done better in your interview to get selected, okay? The reason why I always say wait for the dust to settle, what you do not want to fall into is if you are still angry about it, you still have some animosity, or you have a chip on your shoulder because you didn't get selected, or maybe you thought you were a better fit than the person that did get selected. All of that is counterproductive to you. It only hurts your situation. You want to make sure you're at a point where you've digested it, you're level-headed, and then that new person's been hired so you can truly get objective feedback. What you don't want to do is do that too early, and now the hiring manager, rather than giving you productive feedback, is worrying about, is this person making an inquiry so they could file a complaint right after this, right? We don't want to do that. So think about that, and hopefully you can get some feedback. And another thing that I encounter frequently with employees when they're getting those first or second tier interviews, but they're not getting selected, is there might be some underlying issue that is still hanging out there. And I'll give you an example. If you are applying for a job in a service, like for example, in your same hospital, your same system, or on the same team, there might be some underlying issues that are hurting you. And I always use the expression, look at all the relationships you have on that team. It could be with the manager, but it doesn't have to be necessarily that way. You could also look at some of the other team members, maybe even some of the employees ranking lower than you, right? You might have had some type of bad incident with them that has put a bad taste in people's mouth. And the technique I use with my customers is called cleaning up your mess. So if you had a bad incident, or maybe you made a mistake in the past, and now you've corrected that mistake and you've moved on, talk to the people that was impacted by that mistake, and try to, if it's necessary, apologize. If it's necessary, explain, acknowledge what happened, owned it, and then from there, tell them about some of the things you did to correct it and move on with your career. So hopefully that not reestablishes your reputation, but reinforces and strengthens your reputation back to a place where you want it to be. Okay. Another question I had is, tell us what you do when you have nothing else to do at work. If you feel like you're kind of bored at work, if you feel like if you're not making any progress, right? This question, this is from Walter. It's a little vague. What I would do is continue to work on the list of stories or the list of facts that you're going to make in your notebook, and continue to practice those things, right? Or look for new projects that you never thought about in the past, and then from there reach out and kind of we call those stretch assignments. Broaden your scope of experience to things that you wouldn't normally do in your job, but will better prepare you for the next role that you're interested in. Okay. The next question is, it was actually a interview question that I'm going to cover at the end of this video. So I'll ask this question and we'll go from there. One of the other topics is questions specific to resumes. In the past, I've always been taught to make it succinct. However, it may seem like more detail would be helpful here. Is it okay to include special projects training on your resume? Does this formatting wide if it is special section dedicated to the projects or training should be listed under the job where it was completed? My answer to that is absolutely yes. If you worked on a special project or you went to a specific training, that you took the training and you put it to work at your day job, certainly put that in your resume. I do recommend you list that project or that training under the specific job you were doing at the time, even though it is a special detail or something you volunteered for, because it was during that time frame, right? The time frame that you worked at that specific job. To go to training, which is a really good point, when you list your education and your training, most of us will document that towards the bottom of your resume under the education, training, or licensure certification section, which is great. But when it comes to training, one of the things that I tell people that attend they even attend my training classes is, when you just listed, big deal, right? All that tells the readers that you sat in a classroom for 8 hours or 2 days and you sipped coffee all day. You were present. But it does not mean you did anything with that training, or you didn't do anything to challenge and move yourself further in that skill set. So what I would recommend under that training is list 1 or 2 examples of how you used it in a work environment, right? And if you want some examples of that, reach out to me directly and I can give you some examples. But yeah, for example, I teach a class on crucial conversations. It's 2 days, all day long. And if you came to my class, but then you followed up that in your resume, you used it in a resume bullet, or at the bottom of your resume, if you listed under education, you say, I use the techniques from that crucial conversations class to resolve 2 misunderstandings with a coworker and another misunderstanding I had with my manager, right? So that's the way you implement it at work, okay? So moving on here, another comment was, one of my favorite PBIs is tell me about a time you had to break the rules to improve veteran care. Let me answer that question at the end. This is one of the other questions I'll answer at the end of this video, okay? Another comment I have is, as an interviewer, I've seen everything from 1-page to 20-page resumes and CVs. Where is that happy middle? Well, this is a great question. What I tell people is the length of your resume should be dictated by 2 things. The first, which is the major influencer, is by the items listed in the job announcement. If you go to the duties section of a job announcement and it has 14 things listed that they want you to cover, you might have a 7-page resume, right? If they have 3 or 4 things, you might have a 2 or 3-page resume, because the second influencer on that length is the amount of experience you have on those key skills. If you have a lot of experience, you're going to give several examples. If you have very limited experience, you might give 1 or 2. So those are the 2 things that dictate the length of your resume. So even if you're straight out of college and maybe all your work experience was in a residency or internship, it could still be 3 pages long. Or you could have a 40-year career. You know, if they're only asking for 2 or 3 things in the job announcement, your resume could be 2 or 3 pages, even though you have decades of experience in the field, right? So the next question is, what would you rather do to complete a task on time to assure the task? Okay, so this is another interview question. I'll describe later. Another comment that was made, or another question that was asked: is it really advantageous to include a cover letter in your application packet? Okay, so cover letters. I have an entire video on cover letters, and from the HR specialists I've spoke to about 7 about cover letters. All of them say the same thing. You could do it, but it doesn't work hard for you. When what they mean by that is they don't read them. They're like, Greg, we don't have time to read them. And quite frankly, I figure if I read one cover letter and I don't read all of them, it's giving that candidate an unfair advantage. If they do submit a cover letter, I'll forward it to the hiring manager. But even at that point, we don't know if the hiring manager actually reads it. What I would recommend if you have a question about cover letters is take the time you would invest into writing a good cover letter and write an even better resume, or do more practice for your performance-based interview. I think those are the 2 things that are gonna be, I call those your money makers. Those are the two things that are gonna pay you the most dividends rather than a cover letter. So I think that time can be used more effectively in your resume and also preparing for your PBI, performance-based interview. Another question is, I just saw a resume this morning that came through our fax machine and had a QR code on it that was supposed to be linked to a video of the person, okay? So I would not include anything like that on a resume. QR codes, pictures of yourself. Matter of fact, HR has been given instruction, at least in our VA, to remove all types of images from resumes before they forward it to a selecting official. So if you do have a picture or QR code, they're gonna actually manually remove it from your resume. The way I look at that is you're giving that HR specialist more work to process and forward your resume. I'd leave that off. So that's just my my opinion on that. The next question I had was, what would you recommend putting? What would you recommend putting? Private sector work for 7+ years ago on a federal resume? Absolutely. You should put all work experience that's relevant to the job you're applying for. So it could be public sector, right? You could be working for the federal government, but even if you worked for a local hospital, right? A county hospital, a city hospital, certainly put that on there. Matter of fact, one of the other things that people don't know is volunteer work. Whether you're doing an internship, or you're doing a practicum, or you're a official volunteer at a medical center, the federal government, and it's actually listed on a job announcement, volunteer work is considered work experience. It's just compensated at $0. And that's okay, right? Especially when you're trying to accumulate your work experience. So please list it. Some people might think that volunteer work or internships will go at the bottom of your resume under a special intern section or extracurricular activity. No. Put that up front and center, especially if it's relevant, in your work experience, okay? So the next question is, I have included my private sector position. If you are applying for a supervisory job and have never been a formal supervisor, this is a good question. Think about experiences as a preceptor if you haven't had that experience. So this is more of a comment than a question, and I agree with this person who made this comment. If you are applying for a lead position, you are applying for a program manager position or a outright supervisor position, and you never had a formal supervisory role, you certainly want to list your experience as a preceptor, as a mentor, as a coach, if you had a student assigned to you, if you had a volunteer assigned to you, because some of the things that you're practicing in those instances are the exact same as a supervisor would, right? You're training a new student or volunteer or a new employee. You are also evaluating their work. Did they do well? Did they do it properly? And if they didn't, you're doing an intervention. You're retraining them, or you're demonstrating for them, and you're giving them feedback. So those are some of the things that supervisors do regularly. So certainly put those, again, and I would focus on the skills of what I just mentioned rather than the position, right? So you can certainly do that in the future. Let me see what's next. What would you do if you find your examples applied to multiple questions? So this kind of, a few people ask this. If I write my stories, right? I write 7-10 pages of different stories, but then I'm asked 2 or 3 questions that one story can answer. My response to that is I would not recommend using the same story more than twice. If you find that you're using, even though it's a perfect match, the same story 3 or more times, I believe you're not prepared, or you need more practice, right? Either you're not prepared with enough stories, or you need more practice. And the way I explain that is, and someone else, when I was going through these comments, gave the example, and I think, and I'll go ahead and talk about it now, is you got to think about it. Your stories that you create, the 7 to 10 stories you create, think of it, and I always think of it as in specific type of ethnic foods, right? So think about this. Think about one specific type of ethnic food. And when you look at the different types of dishes in that culture, a lot of times when you look at 3, 4, 5 dishes, you're going to notice a lot of the same ingredients, the same vegetables that are going to be included, the same type of protein that you're putting, the very familiar types of seasoning that you're using. But what differentiates each of the dishes is how that dish is made. How long is that meat cooked? How fine or how coarse are those vegetables chopped? What is the sequence in which things are being assembled in the dish, right? So it's very similar to interview questions, right? You can use different stories and different facts and just restructure it for different interview questions, right? In this one story, you may focus specifically on the measurements of success, right? So to speak, maybe the vegetables of that dish. In that same story, you might be focusing on the people that were involved, right? What are the different people involved? So that might be the different types of protein that you're using, right? So just think of it that way. It's the same ingredients, but you're just restructuring it to make a different story, essentially a different dish. So I hope that makes sense. Let me see what else we have here. Okay, so someone made a comment. In their interview, they were only given 2 or 3 minutes to answer the question. And when I modeled answering an interview question, you saw it was a little bit more than 3 minutes. In that situation, what I would really focus on is just giving the facts, like literally going down the list. What did you do? How did you do it? What was the result? What were the people involved? And just hammering the facts as you go along to answer that question. Now, what I would say is don't just give up there. Don't give up on your stories. If you're looking at the body language of the people on the panel and they're really excited, you're excited, they're excited, they're listening, they're hanging at the edge of the seat, and quietly they kind of give you permission to keep going, well, then jump straight into your story. A lot of people, I think, when they're told hey, we only have 10 minutes to answer this question, you're only giving 5 minutes per answer. I think if you're doing a really good job, you'll be surprised that they'll allow you to go on. Now, if you see the body language is very close and they're really trying to stick to their regimen, that's no disrespect for you. They're just trying to be disciplined. Again, go through those facts, go through the sequence, and then move on. So that's what I recommend. Okay, so moving on. The next is a pretty long comment, but I think it's a very good point. I love the suggestion of coming up with 7 to 10 stories and reviewing all the details, then applying them to different PBI questions. Thank you. In the past, I've always summed it up was better to assign stories to PBI question. It's simple to swap them seeming to impactful. This is the question I was talking about. So if the interview is multiple questions, as we say in the Army, I guess uses this acronym of bluff, bottom line up front, and KISS, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, I use that expression too, right? So I totally agree with that. And the point I want to make with this, I kind of talked about it earlier, is I'm telling you to come up with 7 to 10 stories and write the facts. But please remember, this is your interview. This is you performing. This is you presenting yourself. I want you to use what works for you. If you like the Army example, the bottom line up front, and you've seen that be effective, then use it, right? Maybe some of us could borrow that method as well. And if telling yourself that internal dialogue of, hey, Greg, KISS, keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. If that's what works for you, remember, use it, okay? The next question I had is, do you recommend writing down bits of long questions or multiple questions to reference while you're answering them so you don't forget to touch base on all parts? I think this person means during the interview. My answer to that is yes, but during the interview, you should have something to write with, some type of notebook or legal pad and a pen. I do not recommend you writing down the entire question or even part of the question. I talked about this during our meeting, our online meeting, and I also have a video on this. Use anchor words. If it's a 3-part question, write down one word to remind you of every part. And then from there, go back to each one of those words and make sure you hit everything, right? For example, tell me about a time you worked with a variety of individuals towards a single goal and there was conflict. What did you do to resolve the situation? I would write down conflict, multiple people, solution, and just make sure you hit those things. All right. The next question is, I've been advising my trainees. Well, I guess it's more of a comment here. I've been advising my trainees of this advice and having stories they want to tell for years. They use small changes to make their stories fit the answer of the interview question. So it's so helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree with what you're saying. I gave the example of creating different dishes with the same ingredients, just changing up the way you maybe slice and dice those ingredients, how long or how slow, or how long or how short you cook those dishes, how you might arrange them. So absolutely, I appreciate the reinforcement. The next question is, what is your recommendation for using the standard USA Jobs resume format versus your own? I like custom resumes. This is the reason why. I think when you customize the format, and by the way, if you want a good format, email me at gregory.mesa, M-E-S-A, 2@va.gov, and I'll send you mine. I like a custom resume because it gives you more flexibility. I like changing format. I like changing fonts and bold and getting a little bit, I don't want to say creative, but doing the things I need to do so I make the things I want to pop off the page. And some of the things that are more formalities of information kind of fade into the background. I think the USA Jobs format, when you go on there and it says build resume, I think it's too much white space. I think that when you write out your text, it is too dense. It's very hard to read. To me, if you make me read one of those resumes, it's a chore, right? You better bring chocolate with you. So I don't like reading those. I think it's a bad use of space. And then at the same time, I think there's just better ways to do it. So that's my opinion on that. So it looks like we're wrapping up here. So this is another comment. In preparation, I usually have various people throw questions at me and they will provide me feedback so I can identify gaps. I think this is a great plan. I think everybody who is in a place in their career where they still plan on doing some growing, they should have a small network. You know, at least one, if not up to 2 or 3 people who are smart, who've accomplished a lot of stuff on themselves, that create your network of people who can do proofreading of your resume. They could give you advice, different perspectives of advice. And then when they're throwing those interview questions at you and you're answering them, the feedback that I would ask them is, what did I do well? What could I have done better, right? And then the last thing I ask is, hey, was my answer engaging? Did it get you excited? Were you paying attention? Or was I just kind of going through the motions, right? There was another comment that says, I recommend Toastmasters for fun and learning. Our employee education service has a group here, and it's just a suggestion. I agree. I think for those of you that don't know, Toastmasters is a worldwide organization that really focuses on public speaking. But I would argue that public speaking is done sitting down, standing up, or in a meeting, meeting when you present yourself. So I think it's a great option for those of you that are looking to practice and improve your skills of explaining what's on your mind, whether it be in a meeting or whether it be in a job interview. So great recommendation. And I got another comment that says, great presentation, Greg. I find your shiny star and the shiny badge to speak about, and practice. I agree. Being good at job interviews and doing a good job of conveying your thoughts and your experience and being engaging, guys, is not something anyone is born with. It is a practice skill. So just because you're talkative or you're comfortable in talking in front of people doesn't mean you're a good interviewer, right? If you can be engaging, but at the same time, in a concise manner, right? Trim all the fat out and can answer questions in a short amount of time span that truly answers the question. That takes practice for anybody, right? And the final comment was, this was excellent. Thank you for sharing the process. Can't say I love the idea of recording myself, but I can see the benefits and ability to improve quickly. So one of the closing recommendations I made during our session is, if you want to get fast quickly, to me, in my opinion, the fastest way you could do that is actually recording yourself. Have someone, I'm shooting this video right now on my iPhone, right? So have someone record you answering the interview questions so you can look back at the recording and see your areas that you did well, so you can continue doing that. And then look at the things that you can do to improve, and then work on that. It's a technique I learned from public speaking classes, and it's something that you can do to improve your interviews, okay? So in closing, guys, I promised you that two of you dropped interview questions in this, and I want to ask that question because I think they're good questions, and I want to answer them as if I was being interviewed, okay? Okay, so this is the first question that somebody dropped into the chat, and I'll go ahead and answer it. And the question is, what would you rather do, to complete a task on time or ensure the task is perfect and be late? So this is how I'd answer it if I was in an interview. If I had those two options, my philosophy when it comes to situations like that, it comes from a quote by General George Patton, and he had an expression where, you know, a good idea today is better than a great idea next week. And I agree with that. My focus would be to produce the best quality product or work given the time frame I'm given, right? So that's what I would do. Now, given that, what I would do when I submit it to my supervisor or I present it, let's say the task is to present to a group of people, is give them the best I can given the timeline, because I want to respect other people's time. But in closing, I'd also tell them, hey guys, I have a few more things to offer you. I have some resources to give you. I have some information I'm waiting. I send an inquiry to, like, say, an author of a book, and I'm waiting for him to respond. As soon as he gets back to me, I would like to share that with you via an email or during our next meeting, right? So given that, what I would do is, again, give the best I could given the time frame, and then close with saying, I'm waiting on, or I'm preparing more additional resources that I couldn't give today. I want to send it to you, and then I would send it to them in a manner that works for them. So for example, if you were my audience and you were in Orlando, Florida, and I'm in Nevada, okay, well then I'll email it to you. Or if we meet regularly, let's say we meet once a month, I might say, guys, I'll bring it to the next meeting and I'll hand it out to you face to face. So that's how I would handle that. The next question is, tell me about a time you had to break the rules to improve veteran care. So I thought this was a great question. And this is how I answered in an interview. There was a time I was walking down our hallway in our main medical center. I'm an educator, and I really support the front line of clinicians and MSAs to do direct patient care. But on this specific day, I had an opportunity to actually get my hands dirty, right? I bumped into a veteran. He was a younger guy, maybe in his 20s, and he was a little bit distressed. Because what had happened is this veteran didn't really understand the military system, the VA, what was different. And he had a medical emergency. 3 days ago, he drove straight into a military hospital, the emergency room, to get some care because he was having an urgent issue. Well, that young man was not a retiree. He did not qualify to get health care at a military hospital. But obviously, they stabilized him. They stabilized him there. Then they put him in an ambulance, brought him over to the VA where he did get all of his care and finally was being released. Okay? So this is one of those things I think slips through the cracks. So he bumped into me and said, he was telling me, "Sir, my car is at the emergency room at the military base. They brought me here in an ambulance. I don't have a penny to my name. And I'm just released from the VA and hospital, and I can't get in my car. None of the VA shuttles run over there normally. The shuttles run between VA facilities. I don't have any cab money, and I can't figure out a way to get there." Well, I don't know if this is breaking the rules or is just unconventional. I told him, "Well, you know what, sir? Let me figure this out," right? So what I did is I had him have a seat in a public area, and I told him, "Sir, let me go and try to resolve this issue. Let me try to help you get a ride, but I need you to stay right here." So what I did was I ran downstairs to our motor pool. I checked out a government vehicle, and I have a few friends down there, so I explained the situation. Now, I am a veteran, but I'm also not a retiree. I don't have access to the military base, but my coworker does. So I pulled one of my coworkers who was a retiree. We got in the government vehicle, we picked up the veteran, and we drove him to the base. I drove the government vehicle. My coworker who was a retiree had an ID to get on base, and we brought the young man to his car. Now, at the same time, we knew that we were bringing a young man onto the base, so we waited for him, we escorted him off base, and then we went back to work, turned in the car, and went about our day. So again, I don't know if that's breaking the rules or it's just something unconventional, but I like to think I saw a need, and I could see how this guy slipped through the cracks, especially not having money for a cab, but not even a cab would get him on base if he doesn't have a military ID. Quite frankly, I don't know how he got on the base to begin with, because he's not a retiree with an ID card or active duty. But anyway, that's what I did to address the patient's need, given the resources we had, and just to get creative, especially pulling my coworker, because we have a lot of retirees that work at the VA. Okay. And that is my answer, everybody. With that said, guys, I'm going to wrap up this video because it's been pretty lengthy. If you do want to reach me, I'm at gregory.mesa, spelled MESA, 2 at va.gov, or you can reach our local contact for nutrition, which is Deidre Devereaux, who's a really good friend of mine, and we could do our best to help you in the future. Bye.